My name's Sarah Almond Bushell. I'm a registered dietitian and children's nutritionist, and I am the nutritionist on the Zoono family panel. How you parent around food has a huge influence on how your children will grow up to have a healthy relationship with food. And when we talk about food parenting, what we mean is basically how you act around food. So that includes things like how you talk about food, whether you encourage your children to eat at meal times, whether you use rewards, things like you can't have your pudding until you've eaten your dinner, or whether you might use bribery, you can have the iPad if you finish your chicken, that kind of thing. But also how you react and how you act yourself around food. So for example, if you don't like green beans, you can't really expect your child to eat green beans. So how you act around food as well influences your child's behaviour. And what we used to think was that diet and exercise led to having a healthy child, and what we know now is actually it's much more complicated than that. So of course exercise is important, and of course healthy eating is important, but actually it's how you parent around food as well that has a real influential effect on how your child grows up having a healthy relationship with food. So the biggest mistakes that I see is when families don't eat together. That's the classic one, really. So often mums and dads will have their dinner separately when dad gets home from work and the children eat earlier in the day. And I think that's fairly normal these days, really. But what the research has shown is that even if you can have 3 or 5 meals a week, and it doesn't even matter which meal it is, it could be breakfast if that works easier for you, what that does is it shows your child how to eat. It teaches them that the food that you're eating, provided you're all eating the same food, is safe. So if there's something new on the table, like the green beans, for example, and they don't like them, if they see you eating a green bean, they know that that green bean is safe because mummy's eating it, and it teaches your child how to eat healthily. So parents are fantastic role models, and particularly young children will copy and mimic what their parents do. And so the more you can role model in front of them, the better or the broader balance of nutrients and foods your child's going to end up having as they grow up. Another problem I often see is when parents do use things like the food bribes and the food rewards, or using distractions. So having the iPad at the table because a child will eat more if they're distracted. Well, of course they will, but they're not actually paying any attention to what they're eating and what's actually going on. Part of eating is learning these sort of sensory characteristics, the taste, the smell, what the food looks like on the plate. And if a child's distracted by watching something on their iPad or playing with toys or having the TV on in the background, or even just having silly conversations around the table like pretending to be an animal and guessing what you're trying to be, they are distraction techniques that don't allow the child to fully focus on getting all of those sensory experiences that they would have from eating. So they're some of the classic problems that I see in families these days. Telltale signs that things aren't going well, that your child is not having a good relationship with food, might be them refusing to come to the table in the first place, or in some circumstances they can get really distressed in the lead up to a mealtime. It might not actually be the mealtime itself, but because a child knows that dinner always happens, for example, at 5 o'clock, in those sort of 10 to 15 minutes beforehand, you might notice that their mood's changing. And essentially what's happening there is we are learning that the child does not want to come to the table for whatever reason. So if you've got a child who's reluctant to eat and you're trying everything just to get them to take a forkful or a mouthful, and you're commenting on their eating performance, and then you're offering bribes or suggestions or even what you feel is gentle encouragement, that can feel like pressure to a child, and pressure is anxiety, and anxiety switches off appetite. So that is often a telltale sign. Other signs, more sort of medical signs that we see, are children who don't gain weight, who don't thrive. Sometimes they present with nutritional deficiencies. As a dietitian, I see lots of children with iron deficiency because they have quite a high requirement for iron when they're little, and if they don't eat well for whatever reason, that can be a big problem. Other children, if they don't eat well at meal times, might be asking for snacks because they're trying to make up for what they're not able to eat, and snacks often don't happen at the table, so it's a much lower pressure, perceived pressure environment for them, and so they'll try and fill up that way instead. But actually, the best way to do it is to have a structured meal and snack time, so that all meals and snacks happen at the same place with regularity, so that the children can fill up in the right way at the right time. Another sign we might see of a child who isn't developing a particularly good relationship with food is when they eat in the absence of hunger. And by that I mean eating out of boredom, or unfortunately eating to control their emotions. Some children will overeat, will binge eat on things like biscuits and crisps and things if they're feeling sad, and that's something that we really don't want them to do. Feeding relationship, or the relationship with food, develops right from the start. Babies, when they're breastfeeding or bottle feeding, when you hold them in close and you make eye contact with them, you're forming an attachment, a bond, and that is the initial start of developing the relationship with food. And as they go on, your presence at that dining table at meal times strengthens that attachment and strengthens that bond. So often when that starts really quite well, when children are little, perhaps mum's at home a couple of days a week with them and they're eating lunch together or they're having snacks together, it's often a shame when that changes when children go to school and then no meals are shared at all. Building a connection's really important. It's your job as a parent to be the role model. You must do what you want them to do. So going back to that example earlier, if you want them to eat a piece of broccoli, you've got to be eating that piece of broccoli as well, because you're building that relationship, you're building that connection, and you're role modeling what you want them to do. So they must see you doing that as well. Child is really struggling at meal times, what I would suggest you do is go back to basic. So number one, set up a really good structure for meals and snacks. What this allows you to do is it allows a bit of predictability. So if your child is somebody who asks for snacks constantly, or has tantrums coming to the table and just doesn't eat well, doesn't want to be there, having the predictability can be really helpful. So a routine might look like breakfast, then a mid-morning snack, then lunch, then a mid-afternoon snack, and then tea. And what's crucial about that routine is allowing a decent amount of time in between a meal and the snack, so that your child comes to each eating occasion with a good enough appetite to want to eat. The second thing I would say is if they ask for food in between those times is to say no, but to remind them that actually they're going to be having something to eat at the next meal or the next snack time, and tell them when that is. And if they're quite young, you can link that to an activity so that they understand after they've finished watching TV, then they're going to wash their hands and have their drink of milk and piece of fruit. So you can kind of give them a little bit of a pattern to follow, a bit of a plan to follow, so they understand. Eating together, we've touched on that already, but eating together is really key in this. Children really need to see you eating and see you eating the same food. Not pre-plating meals can be really helpful as well. So if you are having a family meal, putting all of the different components of the meal in separate serving dishes in the middle of the table, and then allowing each member of the family to help themselves is really helpful. So what you're doing there is you're teaching your child about portion control and appetite control. And yes, at the start, you're probably going to get your child's going to eat loads of one thing that they love and hardly anything at all of the food that they don't like. But running alongside that, if you can get your child helping you by preparing meals, experimenting in the kitchen, learning about food and learning about nutrition, and talking about what makes up a balanced meal, in the long run, they will start to serve themselves what they know you want them to do. And when you are putting together meals like that, it's called family style serving, where you serve things separately. Always make sure that there is something that your child likes. So it's great to have new foods, and it's a really good way of introducing new foods to children. But if you've got something that you know that they'll eat, even if it's just bread and butter or milk or something very child friendly, having something that they know that they're going to be able to come to the table and there will be something that they can fill up on, that can just take the pressure down a little bit and ease any anxiety around meal times. Obviously, don't comment on their eating performance. Even rewards, so things like, oh, look at you, you've eaten all of your peas, just don't do it. It's important not to have any commentary at all around their eating performance, whether it's good or it's bad. And I'm also not keen on offering rewards for eating well as well. So often we see reward charts, sticker charts and things like that. But actually I think rewards do more harm than good when you look at the long-term effects on that child. Ultimately, food is just food. There's no good food, there's no bad food. And what we want them to do is just to grow up having a relationship with food, so that they have treat foods, they also have healthy foods. They've just got a really nice balance of all foods at all times. And I think finally, just try and keep meal times pleasant. So it's your job as the parent to diffuse any situations before they arise. Little ones can't sit still for very long at the table. So if it gets to 10 minutes and you think, you're on borrowed time now, let them go. That's absolutely fine. The vast majority of the food that any child of any age is going to eat is going to be in those sort of first 10 to 15 minutes of a meal. And so you can limit meals to a short amount of time. That's absolutely fine as well.